The shuttle smelled like burnt metal and recycled air, and Rida Ansari had been breathing it for 11 days straight. She pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched Station Altherai grow larger against the black. It did not look welcoming. It looked like a fist made of steel, floating above a planet made entirely of poison gas. She was 19 years old. She weighed 53 kilograms, and she was about to walk into a military training facility built for species that could bench press a car. The docking clamps locked with a deep thud. The rear hatch opened and thin, freezing air rushed in. Rida grabbed her bag, one bag, everything she owned for the next year, and stepped out onto the platform. 40 cadets stood in formation. Not one of them was human. Some were taller than 2 meters. Some had 4 arms. Some had skin like stone. Every single one of them turned to look at her, and she felt the weight of their eyes like gravity pulling her sideways. A Bravani cadet near the back blinked his large blue eyes and looked away quickly. A massive Grothan near the front let out a low rumble that might have been a laugh. "Form up," a voice barked across the platform. Instructor Dorvin was Hecary. Reptilian, nearly 2.5 meters tall, with 4 powerful arms folded behind his back. His scales were dark green, almost black, and his eyes were the color of old copper. He walked down the line of cadets with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who enjoyed making others wait. He stopped in front of Rida. He looked down at her for a long time. Then he turned to the group and said, "The Concord has decided, in its endless wisdom, to spend resources on a death world experiment. You will treat this cadet as you would any other. She will receive no special treatment." He paused. Then he added, "She will need none, I am sure." A few cadets laughed. Rida kept her eyes forward. During the equipment assignment, Dorvin handed Rida her gear load out personally. The pack was enormous. She lifted it and nearly buckled. It had to be 30 kilograms heavier than anyone else's. She looked at the other cadets, strapping on their packs with ease. Hers was different. She could see it. She could feel it. The thin Bravani cadet, standing 2 spots down, glanced at her pack, then at his own. His mouth opened slightly. He said nothing. Rida strapped the pack on, tightened every buckle until the straps bit into her shoulders, and stood straight. Her knees screamed. She ignored them. Dorvin assigned quarters. Every cadet received a standard room with climate adjustment and species-appropriate settings. Rida received a converted storage room at the end of a maintenance corridor. The walls were bare metal. There was a cot, a shelf, and a small sink. The temperature was 15 degrees below what a human body needed for comfort. She unpacked her bag. One change of clothes, a toiletry kit, a data pad loaded with training manuals, and one photograph, printed on real paper, of a boy about 12 years old with messy hair and a gap-toothed smile. Her brother, Kamal. She taped it to the wall above the cot. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms flat against her thighs to stop them from shaking. The cold was already working into her bones. She could see her breath in the dim light. At some point, she lay down and pulled the thin blanket over herself. Sleep came in short, broken pieces. At 3 in the morning, the gravity in her room spiked. It hit her like a truck. She was crushed flat against the mattress, unable to lift her arms, unable to turn her head. Her ribs compressed. Her lungs fought for air. The pressure was immense, as if the station itself was trying to push her through the floor. It lasted 30 seconds. Then it stopped, and the gravity snapped back to normal. Rida lay there gasping. Her heart was slamming against her chest. She stared at the ceiling and waited for it to happen again. It did not. She thought about reporting it. She thought about walking to the command office and telling someone that her room had tried to kill her in the middle of the night. But she knew what they would say. They would say it was a malfunction. They would say it was the station settling. They would say she was overreacting. And then they would have a reason to put a mark on her file. Unstable, complaining, not suited for integration. She could not afford that. She was not here for herself. Back on Earth, the military advisors had told her the truth before she left. They said the aliens would not want her there. They said she would face resistance, hostility, maybe worse. They said the entire human exchange program depended on the first cadets finishing the course. If she quit, if she failed, if she gave them any excuse to send her home, the program would be canceled. No more humans. Ever. 3 billion people on Earth were watching through the lens of her service record, and none of them would ever know what happened in this freezing room at 3 in the morning. Rida pulled the blanket back over her chest. She looked at the photo of Kamal on the wall. She thought about the day she told him she was leaving. He had cried and made her promise to come back. She closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, "You have survived worse than this." The station hummed around her, cold and indifferent. Somewhere deep in its corridors, Instructor Dorvin was already planning tomorrow's drills. Rida did not sleep again that night, but she did not cry either. Nobody told Rida when training started. The alarm in her room went off 2 hours before everyone else's, and by the time she figured out it was wrong, she had already dressed, packed her gear, and marched to the drill yard in the dark. She stood there alone for 120 minutes before the other cadets arrived. Instructor Dorvin did not acknowledge the error. He simply looked at her standing there, already exhausted, and said, "Good. You are early. That means you volunteer for the first rotation." The first rotation was a full-speed obstacle course built into the walls and floors of a training bay the size of a warehouse. The barriers were scaled for growthen cadets, species that stood over 2 meters tall and weighed 300 kilograms. The climbing walls had grips spaced for 4-armed heckery. The crawl tunnels were pressurized to simulate deep atmosphere conditions on worlds Rida had never heard of. She ran it anyway. She fell off the climbing wall twice. She dragged herself through the tunnels on her elbows. She finished last by a wide margin. Dorvin recorded a demerit and moved on. The sparring rotations were worse. Cadet Harris was growthen, wide as a door, with skin like rough concrete and small, dark eyes set deep in a flat face. He smiled when Dorvin paired him with Rida. It was not a kind smile. The first hit sent her sliding across the mat. She got up. The second hit landed on her ribs, and she felt something shift inside her chest. She got up. The third hit came low and swept her legs. She hit the mat hard enough to see white. She got up. Harris looked at Dorvin. Dorvin said nothing. Harris hit her again. By the end of the session, Rida could barely stand. She walked to the edge of the training bay and leaned against the wall, breathing through her nose, keeping her face blank. Her ribs burned with every breath. She did not go to medical. During the meal period, the mess hall was loud and crowded. Rida sat alone at the end of a long table with a tray of nutrient paste that tasted like wet chalk. She ate slowly because her jaw ached from a hit she did not remember taking. A tray slid onto the table beside her. The Bravani cadet from intake day, the thin blue-skinned one with the large eyes, sat down without a word. He ate in silence for a while. Then, without looking at her, he pushed 2 extra nutrient packs across the table toward her hand. Rida looked at them. She looked at him. He still did not look at her. He just kept eating. She took the packs and gave him a small nod. His name, she would learn later, was Noel. By the third day, a pattern had formed. Every difficult rotation, every heavy assignment, every unpleasant task found its way to Rida. When the training unit was split into teams, Rida was placed on the team with the fewest members. When scores were posted, her demerits were always the highest. When rest periods were assigned, hers were always the shortest. On the 5th day, Dorvin called her name in front of the entire unit. "Cadet Ansari, you were last to complete the navigation drill. Report to Maintenance Level 7 for corrective duty." Corrective duty meant 6 hours in a low-oxygen maintenance shaft, manually recalibrating atmospheric filters. The air down there was thin enough to make a human dizzy within minutes. The filters were heavy, rusted, and covered in chemical residue that burned exposed skin. Rida went down alone. She worked in the dim light with her sleeves rolled up because the gloves they gave her were sized for heckery hands. The chemical residue ate into her forearms. She recalibrated 19 filters in 6 hours. When she climbed back out, her arms were red and raw, and her vision was blurred from oxygen deprivation. She walked back to her quarters without stopping. She sat on the cot and held her hands in front of her face. They were shaking, not a little, a lot. Her whole body was shaking. She sat there, and watched her hands tremble until they stopped. It took 11 minutes. She did not cry. 3 levels above her, in a quiet office filled with data screens, Lieutenant Finn was reading training logs. Finn was Hecary, like Dorvin, but smaller and quieter. She had spent 2 years studying Earth species file before the human exchange program was approved. She knew what a human body could and could not take. She pulled up the assignment records for Training Unit 9. She sorted them by cadet. Then she sorted them by difficulty rating. One name appeared at the top of every single category. Every punishment detail, every heavy rotation, every extended shift, every sparring match against an opponent 3 weight classes above. Cadet Rita Ansari. Finn leaned back in her chair. She stared at the data for a long time. Then she opened a new file and began documenting. She did not act yet, but she did not look away either. Down in her freezing room, Rita ate one of Noel's nutrient packs and taped a bandage around her left forearm where the skin had cracked open. She looked at the photo of Kamal. Day 5, she said quietly. Only 360 more. The station did not answer. It never did. Rita stopped looking at mirrors after the second week. She did not need to. She could feel what was happening to her body. Her uniform hung loose where it used to fit. Her wrists were thinner. The bruises on her arms had stopped healing fully before new ones replaced them. She moved through the corridors of Station Althari like a ghost, always on time, always silent, always carrying more weight than anyone around her. The other cadets noticed. It was impossible not to. Most of them said nothing. They were not cruel, not exactly. They were simply afraid of Dorvin, afraid of being the next target, afraid of standing between an instructor and his chosen subject. So they watched. They looked away. They told themselves it was not their problem. Harris did not look away. Harris enjoyed it. During a live fire simulation on the 9th day of the second week, Dorvin placed Rita on point. The scenario was a breach and clear drill through a pressurized corridor filled with automated defense turrets. It was designed for armored species, cadets with natural plating or thick hides. The turrets fired training rounds that delivered a sharp electric shock on impact, painful but not lethal. For Grothin, it felt like a pinch. For a human, it felt like being hit with a hammer wrapped in lightning. Rita took point. She moved through the corridor in a low crouch, reading the turret patterns, timing her advances between bursts. She took 3 hits in the first section. Each one dropped her to a knee. Each time, she got back up and kept moving. By the second section, she had figured out the timing. She moved faster, rolling under fire arcs, using debris as cover. She cleared the final turret by sliding beneath its tracking range and disabling it manually. She crossed the finish line and collapsed. Not a dramatic fall, not a shout. Her legs simply stopped working and she went down on both knees, then forward on her hands. She stayed there, head down, breathing in sharp, short gasps. Dorvin checked his datapad. Adequate, he said, and moved to the next drill. Rita stayed on her hands and knees for 30 seconds. Then she stood up and walked to the back of the formation. Nobody helped her. Nobody said a word. That evening, Noel found her in the corridor outside her quarters. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, too tired to open her own door. He sat down beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. You could file a complaint, Noel said quietly. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. Bravani were not loud species. Rita shook her head. Why not? She looked at him. Her eyes were bloodshot and ringed with dark circles, but they were steady. Because I knew this would happen before I came here. Noel stared at her. You knew. Earth's advisors told me. They said whoever went first would be tested. Not the training kind of tested. The breaking kind. They said the Concord does not want humans in their military. Some species think we are too fragile. Some think we are too dangerous. Either way, they want us to fail. Then why did you come? Rita leaned her head back against the wall. Because if I quit, the exchange program ends. No more humans get sent here. No more chances. Every person back home who could be standing where I'm standing right now depends on me finishing this course. She paused. I did not get to quit. Noel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, that is an insane amount of pressure for one person. Rita almost smiled. Humans have always carried more than we should. Is the one thing we are actually good at. She pulled herself to her feet, punched in her door code, and disappeared into her freezing room. Noel sat in the corridor for a while, staring at the wall across from him. Then he stood up and walked to the administrative level. 3 floors up, Lieutenant Finn was already waiting for something she did not know was coming. She had compiled 2 weeks of data into a formal report. Training logs, assignment records, medical estimates based on human biology specifications. Every number pointed to the same conclusion. Cadet Ansari was being systematically broken by her own instructor. Finn submitted the report to Commandant Seath through the station's internal review system. Seath was Milori. Old. Political. She had approved the human exchange program because the Concord pressured her into it. She had no interest in a scandal. She read Finn's report carefully, noted the data, and filed it under administrative review. Then she closed the file and did nothing. Back in her quarters, Rida lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling. At exactly 2 in the morning, the gravity spiked again. This time, it lasted 2 full minutes. The pressure crushed her into the mattress. Her ribs bent under the force. Her jaw clenched so hard her teeth creaked. She could not breathe in fully. She could not scream. She bit down on her own lip until it split and blood ran down her chin, because the pain gave her something to focus on besides the feeling of being slowly flattened. When it stopped, she lay there with blood on her mouth and tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. Not from sadness, from pressure, from physics, from a simple mechanical truth that a human body was not built to survive what this station kept doing to her. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She turned on her side and looked at Kamal's photo. Still here, she whispered. The station hummed. Somewhere above her, a file sat unopened on a commandant's desk. Somewhere below her, the gravity systems waited in silence. And Rida Ansari did not break. It started with small things. A Fenari cadet named Soli leaving a clean towel on Rida's gear rack. A Bravani engineer adjusting the oxygen mix in her corridor by 0.5%, just enough to make breathing a little easier without showing up on the logs. Noel sitting beside her every meal, not just sliding nutrient packs anymore, but actually talking, asking her about Earth, listening when she answered. The tide was turning, and it started not because anyone gave a speech or filed a protest, but because the cadets of Training Unit 9 had eyes, and they had finally decided to use them. Noel was the reason. He had begun talking to the others, quietly, one at a time. He did not accuse Dorvin directly. He simply asked questions. Did you notice the weight on her pack? Did you see the sparring rotation? Have you looked at the punishment logs? Most cadets shrugged it off at first, but a few started paying attention. And once they started paying attention, they could not stop. They saw Dorvin assign Rida to 3 consecutive watch shifts while every other cadet got rest. They saw her equipment tagged for inspection failures that did not exist. They saw Harris given free rein to target her in every physical drill, while Dorvin stood by with his arms folded and his copper eyes flat. It was the endurance march that changed everything. The exercise was a 12-kilometer forced march through a depressurized section of the station. Every cadet wore a sealed suit with a limited air supply. The route wound through maintenance tunnels, cargo bays, and decommissioned sections where the temperature dropped to nearly freezing. Halfway through the march, Rida's suit developed a leak. A small puncture on the left shoulder seal. Air hissed out in a thin, steady stream. In a depressurized environment, a suit leak meant death in minutes if it was not repaired. Rida did not stop. She did not call for help. She tore a strip from the undershirt beneath her suit, wadded it against the puncture, and sealed it over with medical tape from her belt kit. The fix was ugly, barely functional, and held together by nothing but pressure and stubbornness. She kept marching. Soli was walking directly behind her. The Fenari cadet was tall and lean, with silver-gray fur and wide, dark eyes built for low-light environments. She saw the entire thing. She saw the leak, the improvised repair, and the fact that Rida never broke stride. Not once. After the march, Soli told the others. She described what she had seen in precise, clinical detail, and by the end of her account, the room was silent. A Grothan cadet named Dag, who had never spoken to Rida, said quietly, "That should not have been possible." Soli replied, "And yet she is still walking." The mess hall incident happened 2 days later. Rida was sitting in her usual spot, eating alone, when Harris walked up behind her and slammed his fist on the table. Her tray jumped. Nutrient paste splattered across her uniform. "Go home, Death Worlder," Harris said. His voice was loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "Go back to your broken little planet where you belong." The mess hall went quiet. Every cadet was watching. Rida looked at her ruined tray. She looked at the paste on her shirt. She looked at Harris. Then she stood up, picked up the tray, walked to the dispensary, and got a new one. She carried it back to the same table, sat in the same seat, and began eating again. She did not look at Harris. She did not say a word. Harris stood there for a few seconds, his massive hands hanging at his sides. Then he turned and walked away. Nobody laughed. Nobody cheered. The silence in the mess hall was so heavy it pressed against the walls. Noel watched from across the room. Soli watched from the corner. Even cadets who had ignored Rida for weeks were staring at the small human girl eating quietly in a paste-stained uniform. And for the first time, they did not see someone weak. They saw someone who refused to be moved. That evening, Noel gathered 3 cadets and walked to Lieutenant Finn's office. He brought Soli, Dag, and a quiet signals cadet named Prin who had been recording Dorvan's assignment patterns on his personal datapad for a week. Finn listened. She reviewed the recordings. She cross-referenced them with her own data. "This is enough," she said. "But I need to warn you. Commandant Seath has already buried one report. She may bury this one too." Noel straightened up. "Then send it somewhere she cannot bury it." Finn looked at the 4 cadets standing in her office. Cadets who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. She nodded. "I will," she said. Late that night, Rida walked back to her quarters and found something on the floor outside her door. A small wrapped nutrient bar with a piece of paper folded beneath it. She picked it up and unfolded the note. It was written in broken human English, the letters shaky and uneven, clearly copied by someone who had never written in a human language before. "You are not alone here." Rida stood in the corridor holding the note for a long time. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. Then she went inside, sat on her cot, and for the first time since arriving on Station Altherai, she smiled. Lieutenant Finn sent the report at midnight through an external Concord oversight channel, bypassing Station Altherai's entire chain of command. It landed on the desk of an investigative panel at Concord Central before Commandant Seath even knew it existed. By morning, an investigation team had been dispatched. Dorvan found out 3 hours later. Nobody told Rida. She knew something had shifted because Dorvan looked at her differently during the morning briefing. His copper eyes held a new kind of coldness, not the slow, grinding contempt she had grown used to, but something sharper, something urgent. He was a predator who had just learned the fence was closing in, and he had one last chance to prove his point. He announced a special evaluation, a solo survival exercise, sealed section, failing life support, hostile drone units, no communication with the outside. It was a third-year scenario, the kind reserved for cadets who had already completed 2 full training cycles. The pass rate for experienced cadets was 40%. Rida had been on the station for 3 weeks. The other cadets exchanged glances. Noel stepped forward and said, "Sir, that scenario is not rated for first-cycle cadets." Dorvan did not look at him. "Cadet Ansari has demonstrated exceptional resilience. I am merely providing her with an appropriate challenge. Unless you believe she is not capable." The trap was obvious. If Noel argued further, he undermined Rida. If he said nothing, she walked into a death trap. Noel clenched his jaw and stepped back. Rida looked at the briefing file on her datapad. Sealed section, limited oxygen, 12 hostile drones with non-lethal but incapacitating armament. No lock-up. No extraction until the scenario timer expired or the cadet reached the exit point. She closed the file. "When do I start?" she asked. Dorvan almost smiled. "Now." The sealed section was a decommissioned wing of the station. Dark, cold. The life support systems had been deliberately set to fail in stages, meaning the breathable air would drain over time. She had 90 minutes of viable atmosphere, maybe less if she exerted herself. The drones would hunt her using thermal tracking. Her only equipment was a basic suit, a single toolkit, and a short-range scanner that flickered in and out. Rida stepped through the airlock and the door sealed behind her. For the first 60 seconds, she did not move. She stood in the dark and listened. The station creaked around her. Air cycled through vents that were slowly dying. Somewhere ahead, a drone's motor whined to life. She moved. The first two drones found her in a corridor junction. She spotted their thermal sensors and pressed herself flat against a ventilation grate, letting the residual heat from the vent mask her body signature. The drones swept past. She waited until they rounded the corner, then ran. The third drone was smarter. It tracked her footsteps and cornered her in a maintenance bay. She grabbed a length of metal pipe from a broken railing and jammed it into the drone's rotor housing. The drone spun wildly, hit the wall, and went dead. She kept moving. Her oxygen display ticked down. 70%. 65. She rigged a trap in a narrow service tunnel using wiring pulled from a wall panel and a detached floor grate. When two drones entered the tunnel, she triggered the grate to drop from above, pinning them both. She stomped on their sensor arrays until they stopped moving. That left 7 drones. Her oxygen read 51%. She was sweating despite the cold. Her hands were shaking again, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from the simple animal drive to survive that Earth had spent 4 billion years breeding in every creature that crawled out of its oceans. She found a maintenance bay with a heavy pressure door and lured 2 more drones inside by banging on the wall. When they entered, she hit the emergency seal. The pressure door slammed shut with a sound like a thunderclap. The drones battered against it from inside. They were not getting out. 5 drones left. Oxygen at 38%. She started running, not away from the drones, toward the exit. She had memorized the station layout from the briefing file, every corridor, every junction, every shortcut. She moved through the dark like she had been born in it. 3 drones converged on her position. She ducked into a ventilation shaft and crawled. The shaft was tight, barely wide enough for her shoulders. The drones could not follow. She crawled for 200 meters in complete darkness, her elbows raw, her breathing shallow and controlled. She came out in a systems control room. Oxygen at 19%. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges. And there in the far wall, she saw it. A backup life support node. Old. Disconnected. The scenario designers had left it in the section as set dressing, assuming no cadet would recognize it for what it was. Ryder recognized it. She had spent 6 hours in a maintenance shaft recalibrating atmospheric filters. She knew what life support hardware looked like. She crossed the room, pried open the panel, and manually reconnected the power coupling. The node hummed. Oxygen flooded the room. She took 3 deep breaths. Then she walked to the exit point and opened the final door. The observation room was visible through a reinforced window above the exit corridor. She could see figures standing behind the glass. Noel, gripping the railing with both hands. Sully, standing perfectly still. Lieutenant Finn, with a recording device in her hand. And Dorvin, standing at the back, his face completely unreadable. Ryder was bruised. She was bleeding from a cut above her right eye where a drone had clipped her. Her suit was torn. Her oxygen gauge read 4%. She removed her helmet. She looked up at the observation window. She said nothing. She did not need to. The Concord investigation team arrived on Station Altherai in a sleek, unmarked cruiser that docked without ceremony. 3 adjudicators in gray robes walked through the corridors with data pads and quiet voices, and the entire station held its breath. They reviewed everything. Every training log, every assignment record, every punishment detail, and sparring rotation for the past 3 weeks. They interviewed cadets, staff, and engineering teams. They pulled the gravity records for Ryder's quarters and found 7 separate unauthorized spikes, all occurring between midnight and 4 in the morning, all targeting a single room. The evidence was not subtle. It was not ambiguous. It was a pattern so clear that even a child could have read it. Instructor Dorvin was summoned to a formal hearing in the station's central briefing chamber. He stood at attention while the lead adjudicator, a very old Milori named Adjudicator Tall, read the findings aloud to a room that included Commandant Seath, Lieutenant Finn, and every cadet in Training Unit 9. Dorvin did not deny it. He said nothing at all. His copper eyes stared straight ahead, and his four arms remained locked behind his back. He was stripped of his rank. His instructor certification was permanently revoked. He was removed from Station Altherai and barred from holding any training position within the Concord military structure. He walked out of the briefing chamber without looking at anyone. The door closed behind him, and he was gone. Commandant Seath received a formal censure for negligence. She had been given a report, had read it, and had chosen to do nothing. The adjudicators noted that her inaction had allowed a pattern of abuse to continue unchecked. She sat through the reading of her censure with a perfectly composed face and said, "Understood." Nothing more. Harris was next. His disciplinary review was shorter, but no less uncomfortable. He was demoted within the cadet rankings and assigned to remedial conduct training. When it was over, he found Rida in the corridor. He was enormous, standing in front of her. His concrete gray skin was flushed darker than usual. He opened his mouth and closed it twice before the words came out. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was low and rough. Rida looked up at him. She studied his face for a moment. Then she nodded once, turned, and walked away. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. And for now, it was enough. The formal inquiry session came last. Rida sat in a chair, facing the three adjudicators in a room that felt too large and too quiet. Adjudicator Tall leaned forward, his ancient Milori features creased and weathered, and asked the question that everyone on the station wanted answered. "Cadet Ansari, at any point during the past 3 weeks, you could have filed a formal complaint. You had the right. You had the grounds. Why did you not?" Rida sat straight in her chair. She was still thin, still bruised. The cut above her, I had been treated, but the scar would stay. She looked at the old adjudicator and spoke clearly. "I did not come to Altherai to file complaints, sir. I came to prove that humans belong here. If I had complained, they would have sent me home. They would have called me fragile. They would have said that humans could not handle integration, and the exchange program would have been shut down." She paused. "I needed to finish. Not for me. For every human who comes after me." The room was absolutely silent. Tal leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Cadet Ansari, in 400 years of overseeing this program, no cadet from any species has completed a third-year solo survival evaluation during their first training cycle." He let that sit. "You are the first." Rida blinked. She had not known that. She swallowed once, nodded, and said, "Thank you, sir." The reforms came quickly after that. Lieutenant Finn was transferred to Concord Central to help draft new oversight protocols for integrated training programs. She would spend the next 2 years building a framework designed to ensure that what happened to Rida Ansari would never happen to another cadet, human or otherwise. Noel was promoted to unit leader for the next training cycle. When asked if he had any requests regarding unit composition, he said, "Assign all future human cadets to my unit." The request was granted. Soli and Dag both received commendations for their roles in supporting the investigation. Pren's recordings were entered into the formal record as evidence, and Rida received a message from Earth. It came through on her datapad one evening while she was sitting on her cot, finally warm for the first time since arrival, because engineering had quietly adjusted her room's climate systems to human standard settings. The message was from Earth's Joint Military Command. It read, "Based on the successful completion of your first training cycle, 3 additional human cadets have been approved for the next intake at Station Altherai. Your service file has been classified as required reading for all future candidates. Congratulations, Cadet Ansari. You have opened a door." Rida read it 3 times. Then she held the datapad against her chest and closed her eyes. 3 more. 3 humans who would walk through the same docking bay she had walked through. 3 humans who would breathe the same recycled air and eat the same terrible nutrient paste and face the same stares from species that had never seen a human before. But they would not face it alone. On the last morning of the training cycle, Ryder stood in the docking bay and watched a transport shuttle descend through the station's intake port. It landed with a hiss of pressure seals, and the rear hatch folded open. A boy stepped out. He looked about 17. Short brown hair, wide eyes, a bag slung over one shoulder that was clearly too heavy for him. He stood on the platform and looked around the massive, echoing bay with the expression of someone who had just realized how far from home he really was. Rida walked over to him. She reached out and lifted the bag off his shoulder before he could protest. "It is going to be hard," she said. "Harder than anything you have done before. But you're going to be fine." The boy stared at her. He saw the scar above her eye. He saw the way she stood, straight and steady, like someone who had learned how to carry weight that should have crushed her. "How do you know?" he asked. Rida slung his bag over her own shoulder and nodded toward the corridor. "Because I will show you." They walked into the station together. Behind them, the shuttle's engines powered down. Above them, the lights of Station Altherai hummed with the steady, endless pulse of a place that never slept. Somewhere in those corridors, a new training cycle was about to begin. And this time, the humans were not alone.